Alright, I've got a confession to make. I've already benchmarked this PC on the test bench. Yeah, I know, it's not something I usually do, but hear me out. I was deep into a CPU comparison and ended up running tests outside the case with the Wraith Prism cooler. With that out of the way, let's get into the exciting stuff. I start by swapping out the 512GB NVMe SSD for a shiny new 1TB one. Why? Because I've decided to significantly upgrade the GPU after seeing just how well the CPU performs. It's like that moment when you realize your setup deserves better and you can't hold back anymore. With the core of this beast being a Ryzen 7 8700F sitting on an MSI B650 motherboard. For memory, I've gone with the Hynix 4800 Mbps kit overclocked to 6000 Mbps with CL30 timings. And let me tell you, MSI latest BIOS profiles? Absolute magic. I stress tested this rig to Kingdom Come, ran every memory test imaginable and it didn't even flinch. Zero glitches, no hiccups, just smooth sailing. I was so impressed I even splurged on RGB RAM heatsinks to make them look as good as they perform. Because come on, when you've got hardware this solid, it deserves to shine a bit. Now onto the case, a pre-dressed H9 Flow clone. Yes, I got duped. Turns out I didn't look at the pictures closely enough, but hey, the fans are surprisingly decent. The case itself, it's fine. It looks like an H9, but yeah, lessons learned. On the cooling front, I opted for a 240mm Arctic Freezer 2. It's not the prettiest cooler out there, but boy does it deliver. And powering everything is a LiteX Superflower PSU, which I absolutely love. It's probably the unsung hero of this build. Let's talk about the CPU, the Ryzen 7 8700F. Here in the UK it costs over 220 Great British pounds, but importing one can save you a good chunk of change. In terms of competition, it's priced similarly to the Ryzen 5 7500F, a 6-core chip with more L3 cache and PCIe lanes. But here's the thing, unless you're running an RTX 4090 at 1080p, the PCI lane difference doesn't matter. X8 PCIe 4.0 is essentially equivalent to X16 PCIe 3.0, so the 30 series card I'm going to be using today will not feel any difference whatsoever. As for the L3 cache, yes, the 8400 has less of it because the disabled graphics code takes up space, affecting the 8700G without the graphics. Against the 7700, it might lose by a whisker in some scenarios with high-end GPUs like the 3090, but it's also 50% cheaper. And between the 8700F and the 7500F, in my testing, the 8700F wins. Those two extra cores are far more useful than slightly more cache. Sure, the 7500F might edge out in single-digit percentages for gaming in some limited scenarios, but overall, the 8700F crushes it. And now, the moment we've all been waiting for, the 3070 TUF is going in. Cue the drum roll?
One eternity later.
Glossing over that little embarrassment, in Heaven's benchmark, the GPU took center stage, pushing an impressive 264 FPS at 1080p on ultra settings. This was with internal recording running, so those numbers hold steady under a realistic workload. What stood out was the consistent frame pacing and thermal performance. The GPU didn't even break a sweat under the most arduous conditions. I am breaking one of my own rules here by dumbing down the resolution to 1080p with internal recording and not running Heaven in its default no tweak state, but this helped out immensely with the next video and I think you're really gonna like that. Rocket League next, and while I anticipated over 300 FPS, the system settled just above 280. This was slightly underwhelming at first glance, but after some testing I discovered the Rocket League's engine occasionally limits performance during certain scenarios like replays or when recording. Disabling the recording bumped the FPS past 300, which is much more in line with the 3070's capabilities. In Fortnite, I tested the system with harder ray tracing and lumen effects enabled. At 1080p with everything cranked up to epic settings, the build delivered a smooth 88 FPS. The lighting effects and realistic shadows were absolutely stunning. For those chasing competitive frame rates, disabling ray tracing and tweaking some settings pushed the FPS into the 180 to 200 FPS range, ideal for fast-paced action and split-second reactions. Horizon Forbidden West pushed the GPU and CPU hard, averaging between 85 to 90 FPS on high settings while recording gameplay. Ryzen 7 8700F didn't bottleneck the 3070 at all, even in the most demanding scenes like large battles or dense forest areas. It's even more impressive how the performance remained stable during extended sessions, highlighting the thermal efficiency of this setup. Oh yeah, I finally started playing Forbidden West and I started it on this PC. Black Myth Wukong was a test of ray tracing and overall GPU power. Running at high settings with ray tracing on low, the system averaged 52 FPS during the most intense battles and cinematic moments. While that might seem low for some, the gameplay still felt smooth and the ray trace lighting effects elevated the visual experience. Without recording, the FPS climbed closer to 60, showing the build's potential for visually demanding games. On to Assassin's Creed Mirage, which was a funny one. We averaged 110 FPS with ultra settings, and in densely populated city areas, the frame rate dipped slightly, likely due to the high CPU demand of Mirage's open world engine, but nowhere near what I saw before, a complete driver wipe with a frankly silly 82 FPS on average. So be careful here, Assassin's Creed is again up to its usual Ubisoft shenanigans. Farcry 6 is a notoriously CPU-intensive game, so I was curious to see how the Ryzen 7 would perform. At 1080p ultra settings, the system held a steady average of 104 FPS. Even in high action sequences with explosions and dense NPC activity, this confirms that the extra cores and the 8700F are doing their job, even in titles that aren't perfectly optimized for multi-core processors, simply by shouldering all the background stuff that usually happens. Oldie but goodie, Shadow of the Tomb Raider posted a very respectable 107 FPS on average. It's hard to believe this game came out a full 6 years ago, as it just looks so good it feels better than some recent releases. Cyberpunk 2077 was the final test. I ran this without the FSR 3 frame generation, thus I haven't really made up my mind how to use it yet. System averaged 67 FPS on ultra settings with ray tracing enabled. Obviously this can be significantly further high using frame generation or just turning down the settings just a smidge. And there you have it. This build is a solid performer across the board. From competitive esports titles like Rocket League and Fortnite to graphically demanding play games like Horizon Forbidden West and Cyberpunk 2077, the Ryzen 7 8400F and RTX 37 TUF combo delivers. Shown itself to be ideal for 1080p competitive with extremely high frame rate gaming, 1440p and even 4K gaming with a bit of care, even handling ray tracing without breaking a sweat. And that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and see you in the next one.